All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get this started. Let's get this party started. All right, it is the night before APUSH. Hey there, students. Tom Richey here, and just getting a little tea steep for the night. And we are ready. We are ready on everyone's soul. Delaney says we are ready. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and to start off, let's just remind ourselves we might have the same crew in here as last night. Together, everyone achieves more. APUSH, May 9th. Is that crew in here tonight? All right, so let's go ahead and hear for some folks. And, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tom Richey. I'm going to be broadcasting just the next little bit and see what's going to happen. Thank you so much, Delaney, for your support. And with this, I'm going to be looking at the YouTube chat occasionally. Like, remember, you're also welcome to come to the Crowdcast, crowdcast.io/Tom Richey. And I'll be looking primarily at questions from the Crowdcast, but every once in a while, I'll be taking a question from YouTube. And also, with that, I'll occasionally be doing Instagram shout outs, TikTok shout outs to new followers on those platforms. Now, with that, let me tell you about a few things we're going to be looking at tonight. I want to make sure that you know what resources are out there. First of all, I want to remind y'all that there is a free practice exam. If you haven't taken it yet, there's still time for you to take it. Now, it's not a full exam, but it's a full multiple choice test, and it is written by yours truly. I wrote every question of this, every answer explanation. I didn't farm it out. This is something I put my own blood, sweat, and tears into. Actually, just my own blood and sweat. I didn't cry. But as far as that goes, my own blood and sweat went into this, and you'll have to time yourself 55 minutes. But again, you just go to Albert.io, and you don't have to pay anything to access this. Albert has paid services, but this is free to everybody. It's 55 questions. It's even got answer explanations. If you show solution, you can see how many people got it right. I love Albert's platform. You can see, okay, well, you guessed this. Well, how did that go against other people? And so with that, and if you're wondering about the multiple choice, if you go to crowdcast.io/Tom Richey, there was a free multiple choice strategy session that we did last night. Now, if you want to access this free full-length multiple choice practice test, just go ahead and put Tom Richey, APUSH test, Albert, and if you just type that in, you'll see Tom Richey's free APUSH practice exam only on Albert. And that is a 55 question multiple choice test that you can take at your leisure. And again, it's something that would be a great thing if you've still got time to do it. Now, remember, you want to get a good night's sleep tonight, okay? You want to get a good night's sleep tonight. And then going into that, we also want to mention that if you type in Tom Richey immigration review notes, I think this is not a bad thing to look at the night before the exam, thinking in terms of immigration and internal migrations in U.S. history, okay? Now, I've also, as I said before, I've also got, if you want to look at those rubrics again, they're there. The unit guides, okay? I've got some unit guides that I've come up with here. Let's see. So APUSH, Tom Richey, Unit 5, review guide. Okay, now I'll let y'all know I've only done this so far for units 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, but each of these unit guides, if you'll Google those, you'll get to a unit guide that basically is a 2-pager for each of those units 3, 4, 5, and 6. If there are any teachers watching, I plan to have a full set next year, but for right now, I think this is going to be a lot better than nothing. So a few things that I've got to share with you. Now, also, people have been eating up those raps on the TikToks, haven't they? They've been eating up those raps on the TikToks. I tell you what, I'm deciding to, and we'll kind of see how things look later on, whether we might want to have a little, a little fireside chat later for some of you. But I haven't really made that decision yet. But right now, I'm going to keep, I'm going to keep on, putting this, getting into review, and we're going to see what the questions are. Now, as far as what we're going to focus on, we are going to be looking at the different, the different questions that are coming in and what's getting upvoted. So with that, let's just go ahead and make sure that we've got that. All right. Have you been paying attention all year? Am I cooked if I started studying today? So, as far as that, when people start to say like T, what they're saying is now, I don't know if I think you don't necessarily need a thesis at the end of paragraph. I often use PEA. And what I'll say here is that like when you write a body paragraph, make your point, create a topic sentence at the first of your body paragraph. Then you'll go from there and you'll present your evidence, okay, and then you'll analyze that. So popping in real quick, thank you, Lynn. I think Lynn probably made a 5 on that thing. Yeah, oh, okay. So T, topic evidence analysis. So your topic sentence and then present evidence, then go in analysis. That sounds great, okay? Because when I say P, it's like PEA, but some people might think that I'm not talking about like the little peas that you eat or whatever. So I think the T is probably better because, I mean, T is undisputedly wholesome, right? So as far as that goes, we'll go ahead and and make a note of that. But those are some things about that you can do there. Answer, cite, explain. Now, when I talk to SAQ readers, just make sure that the biggest thing is that you answer clearly. You know what you're talking about. And usually, from what I hear from SAQ readers, is people get SAQs wrong, not because they forgot, not because they didn't use a format to cite the question, but because they either didn't know it or because they didn't go into enough detail. Remember, when we're talking about SAQs, DBQs, LEQs, it's always about the details, making sure that you're presenting some specific evidence, okay? And so as far as that goes, now, Sophia, just to note here, when we talk about like units 7 through 9, I'm looking for more specific questions. So as far as that goes, going into the, can I go over the most mentioned political groups? Now, another thing that I'm going to do, and I'll just put this out there and y'all can look at it if you want to, I'm going to note that I was just talking to a few of my tutoring clients, and one thing that, and I actually just I'll do something a little more work intensive later on. But let me just go ahead and note, I just went to Chat GPT, and actually I talked back and forth with Chat GPT a little bit, so it went into some 2-for-1 dates. But let me just go ahead and note something here, that it's not important that you know when every single thing happened, but there are some dates that can kind of anchor you. So I asked, went back and forth to Chat GPT a little bit and asked for what are the 20 most important years in APUSH. And maybe next year I'll have this more formal, but I thought this is going to be better than nothing. 1607. Now, of course, 1491 is also important too. It's kind of a ceremonial date before Columbus, saying that, we also have, references to Native American cultures and stuff. But 1607, the founding of Jamestown. If it's before 1607, the English have not set up a permanent settlement yet. If it's after 1607, then they have, okay? Now, this one also mentioned 1620. I don't think that's as important as 1607. That might not make my cut, but I think still an important thing when we think about the Mayflower Compact, and they are agreeing to govern themselves. And one thing we want to remember about the English colonies in general is that they were governing themselves, that at the eve of the American Revolution, every one of the 13 colonies had at least part of the colonial government was elected by the voting population of the colony. And so with that, 1754 is a very important one there, okay? I'm going to go ahead and highlight in gold the ones that are really, really important. The start of the French and Indian War, because this is basically what begins that period of the American Revolution, okay? So 1754 to 1776, this is the period between the start of the French and Indian War and the Declaration of Independence. I'm going to go ahead and say not just 1776, but July 4th, 1776. If you want to consider yourself an American, you should know that one. Now, 1787, we have the Constitutional Convention, okay? So the Constitutional Convention, let me just note this, Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, okay? So the Constitutional Convention meets in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All right. So then we want to note the Revolution of 1800, quote unquote. Now, what we want to remember about the quote unquote Revolution of 1800, why we have the air quotes, is because there are questions that historians ask about how revolutionary was this really. Now, there are some things about Jefferson's election in 1800 that when we think about it, it goes into it. There's a change in partisanship. Like if we pull up the, let's see, Tom Richey, APUSH Unit 3 study guide. Okay. So if you look for that, a review guide or something like that, we see, oh, not that was Unit 4. Sorry about that. But all I've got to do here, watch a little trick here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to run in here and I'm going to say 4. And there we go. Turns into 4. All right. So if you're viewing one of those guides on the internet, you just change the number. Again, I've got these for 3, 4, 5, and 6. So Jefferson definitely did cut taxes and federal spending. He had this, this vision of a quote unquote wise and frugal government. Okay. Now, Jefferson's greatest achievement, the Louisiana Purchase, of course. Some historians speculate, they note Jefferson had some doubts about the constitutionality, but kind of did it anyway. Now, of course, the biggest failure of Jefferson's presidency, the Embargo Act. Oh, this cursed oh grab me, okay? Now, although Jefferson's party takes control of the elected branches and, cuts taxes, cuts federal spending, they don't take control of the judiciary. So we want to note John Marshall's continued hold on the judiciary as a Federalist, okay? Marbury v. Madison and McCulloch v. Maryland. Now, one of the things here, Marbury v. Madison establishes the principle of judicial review, which is never explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, that happens in 1803. Now, I'd say 1800 is an anchor date because that, that kind of brings in a new sort of, historical period and era. 1803, I think, is a very helpful date to know. Okay, that's a very helpful date to know. It's a 2-for-1 because you've got the Louisiana Purchase and you've got Marbury v. Madison. Okay, the Louisiana Purchase, Marbury v. Madison. Now, I will share this with y'all when I'm done showing it on the screen. Sometimes when I share it, when I'm showing it on the screen, it creates an issue. So we're going to go ahead and, share it afterwards. Okay, so if you want to have this, I'll share it with you afterwards. So the Missouri Compromise, okay, 1820. I don't think that's a bad one to know because it's a year that ends in 0. It's easy enough. And the Missouri Compromise is where we see the first time that there's really a debate about the westward expansion of slavery. Now, it's not the first time that the westward expansion of slavery is discussed or implemented. If we go back to the Articles of Confederation, then we're going to see that, it is there, but it wasn't controversial. So 1820 is the first time when the expansion of slavery causes a sectional controversy. Part of this, and it takes place in the middle of the era of good feelings, so-called, this period where there's no partisanship. Now, just because there are no political parties, that doesn't mean that there is, it doesn't mean that we get into, that doesn't mean that we don't have conflicts, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have conflicts. And so that's something that we want to note there. So going from there, 1848 is another 2-for-1 date because on one hand, you've got the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ends the Mexican-American War, and then the Seneca Falls Convention launches the women's rights movement. Okay, these are 2 different things that happen there, and that's something that I think is, you've got a 2-for-1 date, and it's one of those period-ending kind of dates as well. Okay, the beginning and the end of the Civil War; those are, of course, very, very important as well. So we see some things. 1898, definitely a turning point for American foreign policy. I would say 1861 or 1860, really. I would say here, I'm going to say 1860, Lincoln, so we're going to note here, Lincoln elected as president. Okay. So we see here, Lincoln elected as president. Okay. Which leads to, the, secession, okay, the formation of the Confederacy and the Civil War. Okay, so that's what we see here. And of course, that's the Civil War. That's going to be in 1861. But I think that 1860 is a really important date, thinking about the election of Lincoln that set all of these things, this whole causal track into motion there. Now, speaking of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, I was kind of improvising a rap. Some of y'all that are following me on the TikToks at Tom Richey on both Instagram and TikTok. So as far as that goes, we see here that wow, if it's on, I tell you what, that's some funny things going on in the YouTube chat there. So from there, I did do I'm kind of improvising a little rap on YouTube. I don't know, or I mean on TikTok. I don't know if y'all necessarily want to hear that, or if I've got that. I'm working on a little Manifest Destiny kind of mini rap. Maybe I'll turn it into something big later on. But yeah, let's see if we can hear it. Okay, so let's get that instrumental beat going and see if we want to do a little rapping while we're here. So going for that. Okay, so again, I'm just working on it. Yeah, I would say, Cassandra, we don't need to be focusing on things like the Panic of 1819, the Panic of 1837, that kind of stuff. Focus on the main ideas. Focus on, Jackson, the American system, Jackson vetoing the bank, these kinds of things that are bigger things here. Okay, so yeah, just don't worry about all those little panics. Yeah, there's the Panic of 1819, but I would say that the Missouri Compromise is a lot more important than the Panic of 1819. So let me go ahead, since I mentioned the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. I'm working on this. It's kind of like y'all are getting some things I'm working on right now. Oh, I didn't mean to share the screen necessarily, but let's see what we're looking at. What we're looking at here. Okay, so there we go. All right, there we go. It's a process for making progress. Destined for the West. This is manifest. It's a process for making progress. Destined for the West. This is manifest. Texas left the Mexicans. We're getting again. We want the Southwest. Gonna take it when we win. Guadalupe Hidalgo, it's the treaty when it ends. 1848, the gold rush was the trend. It's a process for making progress. Destined for the West. This is manifest. It's a process for making progress. Destined for the West. This is manifest. Okay, but that's what I got right now. You want to see that a little bit? It's on the TikToks at Tom Richey, but I'm having fun with that. Maybe we'll turn that into a bigger thing for YouTube or something like that later on. We'll check it out. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, Panic of 2025, FR, okay? So as far as that goes, if we're thinking about the panic of 2025, I don't know if that, that's one of those things. Now, remember, a panic in the 19th century, that is one of those things that kind of happens later. But let's go over the political groups, okay? When we talk about political groups, one thing that we'll note is when we think about the Constitution and the significance of the Constitution, all right? So the Constitution, like under the Articles of Confederation, there was a very limited federal government, and there really wasn't, there wasn't a lot of like political partisanship, at least not at the federal level. And so when we're talking, I forgot that question was there. It's been sitting there this whole time. Finally going to answer it, okay, y'all? So with that, the mentioned political groups on the exam, when we think about the Constitution, it gives rise to the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, okay? So as far as that goes, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalists. Now, the Federalists are those who are saying that, they believe the Constitution should be ratified, okay? The Constitution needs to be ratified. Now, there are two ideas, and I talk about this more in AP Government, which a lot of y'all are taking next year, I think. So as far as that goes, that when we're considering the Federalist position, the Federalists are claiming that the Constitution, even though it, does add some things to the articles, it adds some power, such as the power to tax and the power to, so the power to tax and the power to control and regulate interstate commerce gives that to the federal government. And so going from that, It's something that just give me just 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be right back. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. Cool Dan has just pulled up. Okay, they have just pulled up there, and so wow, I hope not. I hope not, ladies and gentlemen. And so as that goes, wow, that would be kind of crazy, wouldn't it? As far as political groups, we've got the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. Okay, and the thing is, let me see if I can find something here. All right. Where did that? You know what? I'm just going to kind of wing it here, okay? Because I can't find what I'm looking for right now. So I'm going, yeah, a lot of y'all would ace that, okay? So as far as that goes, the Federalists are for the Constitution, the Anti-Federalists not. The Federalists are saying that the Constitution is both federal and Republican, that basically the Constitution respects the rights of the states, and the Constitution is going to keep the people in control of the government, okay? So the Constitution is going to respect the states, keep the people in control of the government. Now, the Anti-Federalists, okay, yeah, is Don Ho in the chat? I tell you what, that was a really fun thing, wasn't it? Having Don Ho there in the chat. And so going from there, the Anti-Federalist, okay, the Anti-Federalist, these were the people who were against the Constitution. They believed the Constitution was neither federal nor Republican, okay? They believed that the Constitution was actually going to set up a national government that was going to infringe on the rights of the states, and that the government established by the Constitution would be beyond the reach of the American people. Okay, and so with that, as far as that goes, we got some good chats over there in the YouTube. Now, then, once the Constitution is ratified, okay, once the Constitution is ratified, then we have the first party system. Now, one thing we want to remember is there's the term federalism, which basically means that there is a division of sovereign power between the federal government and the state governments. Then you've got the Federalists. Okay, these are the people who want to ratify the Constitution. And then you've got the Federalist Party. Okay, so note that the Federalists who want to ratify the Constitution, they are not necessarily, they're not the same as the Federalist Party. Now, a lot of the people move toward the Federalist Party, and certainly a lot of people joined Jefferson's party, which was then called the Republicans, which we call today either the Jeffersonian Republicans or the Democratic Republicans. These are two terms that are used for Jefferson's party today because it's not there yet. Ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I would not. I'm just going to note here, Julia, that when we think about okay, so AMSCO has this and that and the other, what teacher actually gets to that? That's one of those things that what I would say here is that your teacher is, if you think about it, y'all go ahead and put in the chat, what's the most recent event y'all really covered in any detail in class? Okay, let's just do this as an experiment. If you go into the chat and just say, what was the last time that the last thing that y'all, okay, the Cold War, okay, we've got Obamacare, Watergate, okay, so we see some things here that the Cold War. So when it comes down to it, most classes are very lucky to get to, 1960, 1980. So with that, what we want to think about is that APUSH says that 5%, 5 to 7% of the exam tops, okay, is going to address stuff after 1980. And what I would say here is after 1980, it's just kind of like a declining curve, okay? So as far as that goes, when you think about it, the most likely thing that's going to be asked, and this is one thing we talk about, mention political groups, okay? One of the things when you think about conservatism under Ronald Reagan, like the Ronald Reagan era of conservatism, that's something that we see with this Ronald Reagan era of conservatism, that is something that, comes up on the test a lot. Lower taxes, deregulation, okay, which means like less regulation of business, building up the military, okay, that kind of thing there, okay. So as far as that goes, yeah, I mean, basically, I would say cadence, it is not necessarily the norm. Let's see, let me go ahead and I'll put a poll in there just to underscore the point. Did your class, go into Unit 9, we're going to say post 1980, in any detail, whatsoever. Okay. And let's see that what people say to that. So I want to make sure that y'all aren't going too far off the reservation, so to speak, when you're studying. Okay. Because the College Board is well aware of this. Okay. And I don't know. Okay. So we see here like a little bit of a split here, and we have kind of a smaller group. A lot of people maybe a lot of people from one class, but we note here that at least like a third of classes aren't getting there. And also there are people who are in New England, in New York, where they start school a lot later. So yeah, as far as that goes, there are sometimes, and that's one thing. I don't get very far into Unit 8. We had Hurricane Helene. I had to take a week off. We have some things, that had to happen. Like basically, I would say that this year I lost 3 weeks of instruction. It happens. And so as far as that goes, that Unit 9 is kind of a subunit. You've got basically the meat of the course, the meat and potatoes of the course, Unit 3 to Unit 8, the French and Indian War to the election of Ronald Reagan. Okay, that is basically going to be over 80% of the course. Okay, over 80%. It's where the DBQ will come from. It's where SAQ 1 and 2 will come from. Now, here's the other thing, that SAQ 3 and 4 and the LEQs, they offer you a choice. So I always strategically I always strategically front load my class, because I want to make sure my students remember a lot of the stuff that other people forget. Together, everyone achieves more. May 9th, APUSH. Okay, let's just remember that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Noe, for reminding us of that important fact. Together, everyone achieves more. May 9th, APUSH. So as far as that goes, yeah, we had some weather days. Hurricane Helene knocked out the power. So they understand, the test makers understand that most classes don't get to 1980, or like somebody was saying, like your teacher might say, like, okay, we got through the Cold War, here's a Heimler video or something like that. They're gonna do that. And so with that, that's what we're seeing there. And so don't worry when you're studying Reagan and Reaganomics. Okay. Now, also, there are sometimes questions about globalization. And basically, when we talk about globalization, we're talking about trade, like opening up of free trade agreements and that kind of thing, jobs moving overseas, and that's something that's a battle we're still fighting today. You can see the tension between increasing globalization, which of course makes all of our stuff cheaper. And then you have on the other side, well, the ghost of Henry Clay. I don't know, of all those portraits that President Trump has, like, he's basically made the Oval Office into an art gallery, it looks like. I don't know if there is a portrait of Henry Clay. If not, there should be, because remember, Henry Clay was the one who talked about how we need to make things here. The American system, NIP, internal improvements, National Bank Internal Improvements Protective Tariff. National Bank Internal Improvements Protective Tariff. Thank you, Joey and Noah and Hayden and Jonah and Danny and Jordan and Aub Banana for the new follows on TikTok, ladies and gentlemen. So as far as that goes, now speaking of Henry Clay, should I do the American System song? Because that's another thing if we're talking about political groups. Okay, the first party system being the Federalists and the Jeffersonian Republicans. Okay, so as far as that goes, let me go ahead and get into this here and we'll go ahead and take a look. Take a look here. Let me just let you know while we're kind of going through this in order. After the Constitution gets ratified, because this is something I think that's probably one of the most important things that's going to be on the exam. Okay, is this conflict between Jefferson and Hamilton after the ratification of the Constitution. Now, when we talk about the Federalist Party, it's not the temporary alliance of the it's not the temporary alliance, okay, between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, but these are permanent political alliances, which is, of course, what Washington is warning us about in his farewell address. So when we think about the first two-party system, 1791, 1816, you have the Federalist Party. Now, again, that's not, the Constitution's been ratified. Hamilton just kind of recycles the name again, right? And then you have what Jefferson called then the Republican Party, which I typically refer to as the Jeffersonian Republican Party. Your exam is more likely to use the Democratic Republican Party. Now, again, scholars go either way on that. I prefer the Jeffersonian Republican Party because I think that it creates more of a unique kind of thing there, because when people say Democratic Republican, they're kind of trying to tie it to Jackson's party, which I understand why they do that, but it doesn't think about like the era of good feeling, okay, and how Jackson's party's not identical to Jefferson's party. So with that, the first two-party system, we've got the leaders now on one side, Alexander Hamilton and John Adams with the Federalists, Jefferson and James Madison. So you got Thomas Jefferson and James Madison here. And then, now remember, James Madison had been a Federalist when it came to the debate over the Constitution. But then he joins Jefferson's party after the Constitution is ratified because he doesn't think that Hamilton's really trying to stick to the Constitution. He thinks that Hamilton is just trying to create the strongest central government that is possible. Whereas Madison believed, and this is what Madison wrote in Federalist 45, that the Constitution actually reserves a lot of rights to the states. Now, remember, speaking of the Constitution, I wrote a book about it. U.S. Constitution 101 is available on Amazon or wherever you buy books. Probably not the last time I'll say that tonight. I love my book. I tell you what, So with that, when we think about federalism and then the fears, like why do we need a strong central government? The Hamiltonians fear anarchy and mob rule, whereas Jefferson and Madison, looking back at the American Revolution, they fear tyranny. Now, the Constitution, Hamilton is a loose constructionist. I despise the Comic Sans font, as some of y'all know that have been watching this for a few days. I despise the Comic Sans font, but I think that it's something, when you think about loose construction, it's kind of a Comic Sans of constitutional interpretation. It doesn't really take the text of the Constitution seriously. It sees the Constitution as more of kind of a general guideline, whereas Jefferson and Madison say that the Constitution should be interpreted strictly, that it's something that we need to be very mindful of what it says and what it doesn't say. Now, Hamilton's support is more in urban areas and in commercial areas, coastal areas. Now, the thing is that most Americans at that time, and that's why Jefferson's party, even though it's a minority in the 1790s, it takes over the elected branches of the government after 1800, and it doesn't go back from there. So Hamilton believes that the government, the federal government, should actively promote the development of manufacturing. Now, note here, as I was talking about globalization, after 1990, we start to see increasing globalization, and we start seeing the United States, like the manufacturing in the United States, going way downhill. But in Hamilton and Jefferson's time, most Americans were farmers. And then we see here that Jefferson's more of a laissez-faire guy. Now, the biggest fight between Jefferson and Hamilton is over the national bank. And again, Hamilton says we need this to promote manufacturing. And Hamilton is a loose constructionist. He says, okay, Jefferson says, look, it's not in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that empowers, that says that the federal government, that Congress can charter a corporation, that is a right, as Jefferson sees it, that is reserved specifically for the states. Okay. Now, Hamilton was in favor of things like protective tariffs. He didn't get it, but he was in favor of it. And then, the federal assumption of state debts. This is the kind of stuff if you want to make a five, but foreign policy. Hamilton and his people, Anglophiles. They were people who liked Britain. Whereas Jefferson and Madison, Francophiles. They liked France. Remember, Jefferson and Madison believed that the French Revolution, while it had its problems, was still something that was preferable to the absolute monarchy that existed before it. And so Jefferson and Madison believed that the French Revolution did not invalidate the Franco-American Treaty of Alliance from the Revolutionary War. Whereas Hamilton argued to George Washington that it did, that the French Revolution invalidated our alliance with the French. And Hamilton definitely succeeded in pushing Washington in a more pro-British direction, where we have something, like the Jay Treaty. If you want a piece of specific evidence for the Federalist Party favoring Britain, you can look at something like the Jay Treaty that was passed, at the tail end of Washington's administration. So that is the first party system that basically, lasted from the 1790s through the War of 1812. And of course, it fell with the Hartford Convention, which was a gathering of New England Federalists at the tail end of the Cold War. So as far as that goes, oh my goodness, there are the Hamilton musical people again, okay? So as far as that goes, we've got that one. Now then, we get into the second two-party system. Now, with that, we want to consider the market revolution, where you think about the economy turning into more of a capitalist economy. We have steamboats. We have, Henry Clay wants to have the internal improvements and all that. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and sing the Henry Clay American System song, and then we'll look at the second party system, after which I think I'll probably hop right into Whig Party Free. I tell you what, that Whig Party Free, that little kind of informal one on the TikToks is, it's doing all right over there. I tell you what, y'all spend all that time on the TikTok, and I've just been wondering, what is that thing? And then somebody, I'm just like, what? Let's just kind of maybe see what it is, and go from there. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and we'll do the American System song. Looks like we got, let's see, just got 2 ads. Oh my goodness, I set the ads on conservative. So as far as that goes, we'll see. But looks like Cloudy Yannel already. He's about to sing. Okay, she's like, he's about to sing. I'm not necessarily going to go. But I will let y'all know on YouTube that I did set the odds for the ads for conservative. I picked the most conservative setting. So if you're getting a lot of them, not because I set it up that way. Now, remember, if you want to come to Crowdcast, crowdcast.io/Tom Richey. There are no ads there, and it's free. Okay, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can stay on YouTube. We welcome the YouTube crowd, but we also have this on Crowdcast. All right. All right, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and sing Henry Clay's American System song, which is on my SoundCloud, and I think I put the chorus on the TikToks a little while ago. It's to the tune of Adam Sandler's Lunch Lady Land, if any of y'all have ever heard that. Woke up in the morning. Oh, wait. Close it up. Woke up in the morning after a night at the saloon. Went to the House of Representatives with my pal John C. Calhoun. This embargo isn't helping us protect ourselves, but Madison finally listened, and now we're in the War of 1812. Remember, Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun were war hawks before the War of 1812. Turns out we weren't as prepared for war as I thought we might have been. The British burned down the White House, much to our chagrin. Sure, it ended well at New Orleans. Yeah, that was quite a win. But for our economic future, we need to focus with it. Yesterday's economy was built on foreign trade. Let's see, there we go. If we can achieve economic independence, then we'll have it made. If you know the chorus, sing along. Internal improvements, national bank, national bank, national bank. Internal improvements, national bank. Protective tariff brought some steamy boats, steamy boats, yeah. Steamy boats, some western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, west. Well, I dreamt one morning that I woke up to see the United States had built a national broadcasting for 2 weeks straight. We'll do that to you. National economy, Jimmy signed into law the second national bank, supporting economic growth, and y'all had Henry Clay to thank. Then internal improvements, bridges, roads, and canals to connect all the sections, gonna make us all pals. A protective tariff to build home industry. Our economy won't have to count on British sympathy. Why cross the Atlantic, travel out of our zone when we can build factories, make stuff right here at home? I know the South's not eager. No, they're not on my side, because they grow cotton for the world and they ship it far and wide. In 1828, they said that tariff's too high, and John C. turned on me and Carolina nullified. I said to Calhoun, you've got nothing to fear. Ship your cotton up north and we'll process it here. The American system is pursuing a goal to build a home economy free from foreign control and ride some steamy boats, steamy boats, steamy boats, steamy boats, build some western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, west. Internal improvements, national bank, national bank, national bank. Internal improvements, national bank. Protective tariff rights on steamy boats, steamy boats, yeah. Steamy boats, steamy boats. Western roads, western roads, yeah. Western roads, western roads, built some western roads. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I find music is a way to, help us remember things. There are things we can study all day, but then if we can kind of remember a little catchy song or something like that, that tends to be something that can be good for us, right? So somebody's going to get a 5. Somebody's going to get a 5. Oh, my goodness. Okay, cool. Then says he's probably going to have to sharecrop after he gets a 2. That's unfortunate. All right. So, Parisa, what is your question? Is this a simple one? So, as far as that goes, when we think about the second party system, okay, we want to think about that second party system, which pretty much happens after the era of good feeling. Okay, so the era of good feeling, which is basically James Monroe's presidency, this is a time where we don't really have political parties. Now you've got the Missouri Compromise. There are certainly things that are controversial at that time, but some things, let's see, I'm looking for, there's the second party system, ladies and gentlemen. So as far as that goes, we want to understand the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. And, I'm kind of going into some detail here. But again, when you get it's really kind of a gamble. Okay. When you think about taking the exam, it is something that if what you went into detail about happens to be on the exam, you are going to be doing great. Now, if you just covered everything a mile wide and an inch deep, you might not remember most of the stuff. So there's a method to the madness of thinking about in terms of let's pick some topics that a lot of people are asking about, and let's dive into them. So basically, Henry Clay versus Andrew Jackson. Clay wanting a more nationalistic interpretation of federalism, whereas Jackson states rights. Now, this is one of the reasons I think they call, they call this the that they call this, like, Jefferson's party, the Democratic Republican Party, because we see some things here that we see that the Whigs want a strong Congress, Jackson wants a strong presidency. Now, as far as the Constitution, the Whigs have a loose, the loose construction, and the Democrats strict construction. Okay, Jackson, when he vetoes the bank, he's like, look, this is something that interferes with the rights of the states, that it's something that the Constitution doesn't authorize here. The Whig Party is more supportive of moral reform, and the Democrats less supportive of moral reform. And so the economy, again, kind of like Hamilton, that Henry Clay wants direct federal support for economic development, whereas Jackson is more laissez-faire. We'll see on this map that Clay's party, the Whigs, they've got more support in the Northeast, to some extent the West, and then Jackson's more in the South and the West. So then the American system, of course, Clay's party being loose constructionist, they support all that. Now, note, Jackson's party by and large was more popular, especially the farther south and west you went outside of Tennessee and Kentucky. Most of the Whig support, the consistent support, was in the northeastern, kind of eastern seaboard coastal states. So the American system, yes, yes, yes. Whereas Jackson, big time no on the national bank. He vetoed the thing. Internal improvements, also vetoed the Maysville Road and other internal improvement projects, and then the protective tariff, depending on whether you were from the North or the South. Now, both parties took part in political campaigning, as we see that politics is going more toward the common man at this time, what we often call Jacksonian democracy. Both major parties opposed nullification. Nullification was kind of a South Carolina thing that nobody else really latched onto outside of the state of South Carolina. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we're going to note that we have given this one, due attention here. So we're going to go there and kind of give that one. But again, I think, Whig Party Free has been making its rounds on the TikTok. Y'all want to hear Whig Party Free live? Y'all let me know, okay? So as far as that goes, we'll, wow, the unfortunate night before APUSH. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Shout out to JD's class at VHS, okay? Thank you, Trixie, for the kind words there. So going from that, we'll go ahead and let's see. Are y'all way of life? All right. So we're going to do the Whig Party Free. Now, we heard Henry Clay's side of the story, right? We heard Henry Clay's side of the story. Now we're going to hear Andrew Jackson's side of the story, okay? So as far as that goes, okay, so we're going to go ahead and get this going. Let's hear Andrew Jackson's side of the story, ladies and gentlemen. And let me go ahead and pull that up. Let's see. All right. Just wanting to come on here. I think it's just turned left. Okay, there we go. All right. So we're going to get this started. All right. And remember, some people get confused. They're like, wasn't Andrew Jackson like a member of the Democratic Party? And yeah, Andrew Jackson's the leader of the Democratic Party. That's why he is Whig Party Free. Okay. Whig Party Free. And, kind of like, Glorilla's song is FNF. That doesn't make her an FN. I don't think I can say those words. Okay. Like, yeah, both of them would be very problematic for me for different reasons. Right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and get that Whig Party Free going. If we stream long enough tonight, we might even do it twice. But as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, Whig Party Free. Shout out to Glorilla if she's out there watching. I'm WHIG wig party free. That mean I ain't gotta worry about you, do I, Henry? I got my VETO pen in my hand, and I'm using it to kill your ratchet legislation. I'm WHIG wig party free. That mean I ain't gotta worry about you, do I, Henry? I got the SPOILs in my hand, and I'm giving all the jobs to all my Democrat friends. Veto, gotta kill the bank before it kills me. Veto, gotta kill the bank before it kills. Wigs, I'm old Hickory, the New Orleans hero. You can catch me stopping traffic on the Maysville Road. More power to the common man. Oh, said I lost in 24. Whoa, no, Henry Clay is stole. I be cutting off them bank lights, standing up for states' rights. Wig cartoonists draw me like a king. That means they scared, right? I veto in the winter, in the summer, pin out every night. Put that U.S. to sleepy better. Good night. To the victor go the spoils, just as they should. Try and override me, wishing that a wig would. I don't want your paper money, species still good. I kill the bank before it kills. I'm WHIG wig party free. That mean I ain't got to worry about you, do I, Henry? I got the VETO pen in my hand. I'm using it to kill your ratchet legislation. I'm WHIG wig party free. That mean I ain't got to worry about you, do I, Henry? I got the SPOILs in my hand, and I'm giving all the jobs to all my Democrat friends. Veto, kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I tell you, I love that one. I love that one. It's just fun, getting that going. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what we've got in the next questions. Okay. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, and again, that is on my SoundCloud. It's on YouTube. It's on circulating on the TikToks. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, are there tricks to remembering specific cases? Okay, what they were about in the moment. Okay, so we've got here is Serena has a great question here. And one of the tricks here, to the extent that there is a trick, and I think there may be teachers in the chat as well, that I would say that one of the tricks is making sure you're not remembering more than you have to. Okay, you're not remembering more than you have to. So let's think about what are the most important court cases for APUSH. So I'm going to go ahead and get in, kind of put this at the top of my head. Okay, so thank you, Cloudy Yanel. Cloud, if I'm doing this, Andy, thank you for the kind words over there in the YouTubes. Okay, so as far as that goes, that think about the cases that really matter. Marbury v. Madison. McCulloch versus Maryland, Dred Scott versus Sanford, okay, Plessy versus Ferguson. Then you've got Korematsu versus the United States, Brown v. Board. Okay, I would really say that when we're thinking about that, Esther, I wouldn't mind going over the Gilded Age. If you'll put that, I'm going to put that in the questions and see if anybody latches on to that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put that in the questions and see if anybody latches on to that. Simple formats for the DBQ and LEQ. Chloe, we could possibly look at that later. I'll consider that. Now, here's the thing, Julia. When we get into Gideon versus Wainwright, Miranda versus Arizona, like that stuff's really much more constitutional law, and we always think of those as an important case, but is it really important for a survey level course in APUS history? I would say not. Now, Miranda versus Arizona is not even on the AP government exam as one of the required cases. FR, okay? So with that, that Gideon versus Wainwright, I would say that is more, unless it just sticks with you, but I wouldn't study it tonight. You see, I would study, let's see if I rattle off the same six. Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch v. Maryland, Dred Scott versus Sanford, Plessy v. Ferguson, Korematsu versus the United States, and Brown v. Board. I would say that those are the ones that are typically going to be most useful. Okay, so that's something that I think one of the biggest tricks is that you're not trying to remember cases that are extremely unlikely to be on the exam. Okay, so you're not, this isn't an exam about like criminal law, this isn't AP government or anything like that. So with that, Okay. So the thing is, Parisa, I would say here that it's just, I always tell people all the time, and y'all have heard me say it, those of you who've been in these things for a few days, I don't predict, I cook. Okay. I don't predict, I cook. And so your idea here is, okay, let's just kind of like go over this. Okay. Let's think about this. So the LEQ, there are going to be three to choose from. All right. Now, if we're looking at the DBQ rubric, if we're thinking about something kind of simple here, right? So, and with that, somebody has to go over the Gilded Age. Remember, if you just Google Tom Richey APUSH Unit 6 review guide, you'll see my 2-pager on the Gilded Age. I'm open to taking a look at that if y'all want to see it tonight. Okay. I'm because we didn't do a Unit 6 review. So I'm glad to spend some time going over that. No problem. Now, APUSH DBQ rubric. Okay, if we're looking at the APUSH DBQ rubric, what we're going to see here, we're going to see that the most important points for us to earn, thesis. Okay, then you've got these document-based points that you don't really need to know any outside evidence. I mean, you can get a 4 out of 7 if you're good at writing the DBQ. So there's only one DBQ, partly because the topic doesn't matter as much as the LEQ. So then let's go ahead and take a look. 2024 APUSH free response. This is publicly available online. We've got set 1 and set 2. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at set 1. And so the thing is, the DBQ topic, it's much more about it not be, and then the thing is, look at this. Antebellum reform, antebellum women's rights. Okay, then we've got the New Deal. I mean, is Social Security during the New Deal? Does this look obscure to y'all? It doesn't look obscure to me. Thank you, Callista, and Adversary M, Joey, Meglio, Noah, Hayden, and Jonah for the recent TikTok follows. That Tom Richey. So with that, and then when we look at 3 and 4, you get the choice between 3 and 4. So they put choices here that the free response is not really, it's not gotcha time. I think that y'all, 85%, they've done studies, 85% of the things that we worry about don't end up coming to pass. Okay. And so with that, we can go for British government policy in colonial North America, or United States Cold War policy. Now, this is where when people are like, oh, my teacher didn't get here, my teacher didn't get there. The thing is, well, if your teacher didn't get here, then do this. Okay. Hopefully y'all did a good job over here. And so you've got a choice. Now, then you've got the DBQ, which is basically about the institution of slavery in the United States between 1783 and 1840. Surely you can figure out something to kind of throw in there. Okay, there's got to be something that we can think about in terms of some outside evidence you can throw in. I mean, it's a really big deal there. Now let's see this. 1791, okay, 1820. Okay, they go from 1791 to 1820. This is what I call a gap. Okay, this is 29 years. Okay, so the total on the DBQ is 40, it's 57 years. Now, 1783, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, that ended the American Revolutionary War, and we see that Britain recognizes the independence of the United States. I note that most DBQs that I see, the time frame is between 30 and 60 years. That's what I usually see there. Now, check this out. When we go to 1791 and 1820, that's 29 years. That's half of what we've got here. Okay. So here's the thing. A couple of things that I would say that we didn't get to, right? That basically what it skipped over is we can see here that the cotton gin, okay, the invention of the cotton gin, which is something that, who invented the cotton gin? Okay, you should, Eli Whitney, there you go. Who invented the steel plow? John Deere. Now, that didn't have anything to do with slavery, but still, there are some things that you should have. Now, also, I noticed that it passed over 1808, which was the year that, Congress banned the international slave trade. So whether we're talking about the cotton gin or what's going on with the slave, with getting rid of the international slave trade in 1808, there's so much basic outside evidence that they skip over, and they do it intentionally. Now, we don't get we get William Lloyd Garrison. We don't get to put him. But let's think about this. What about Frederick Douglass. Okay, so if I think about, okay, there's William Lloyd Garrison, can't use him, he's an abolitionist. Well, who was another abolitionist? Well, Frederick Douglass was another abolitionist. Okay, like we think about, he wrote the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, okay, an American slave. And this was, now it was first published in 1845, but I would bet you that if you mention Frederick Douglass, they're not going to say like, hey, you know, that's no good. Okay. So the thing is there that if you look here, then you see 1836. Now, the other thing we can note here is if any of you are going like the 4 or 5 route, the gag rule in the U.S. in the U.S. Congress, okay, the gag rule that they didn't talk about slavery in the 1830s, and then also I don't see anything about the positive defense of slavery. You know, when you think about the Southern slaveholders and where they start in response to abolitionism, they start responding by saying that, you know, they believe slavery is actually good. Okay, now with that, people like John C. Calhoun. Now, what I'm trying to tell you here, okay, is you're trying to predict the prompts, but at the same time, why predict the prompts when we think, hey, you're welcome, Cadence, that's why we're here, right? I mean, if there's stuff that you forgot that we're actually, you know, getting into, then that's great, okay? That's what we're trying to do here. So together, everyone achieves more. May 9th, APUSH, okay? Let's remember that, ladies and gentlemen. The gag rule was in the 1930s and early 1940s, like mid to late, like 18, sorry. Woo, wake up, Richie, wake up. So the 1830s and into the 1840s, that basically when Congress received anti-slavery petitions, they said that they are not going to, they're not going to accept them. So what I want to note here is that the DBQ topic tends to be pretty general, and it will intentionally skip key stuff. So it's easier than you're remembering, okay? Yes, remember Don Ho, okay? Remember the Maine, remember Don Ho, right? Remember the Maine, remember Don Ho, 1898, all right? And so with this, don't be scared of the DBQ, okay? Because it's really not as scary as you think. Now, here's another thing, that when you get to the LEQ, now, with that, when we think about the LEQ, let's go here and we see we've got a choice of 3. Well, my teacher barely got to the Cold War. Well, you know what? Well, let's take a look here. 2 of the 3 questions for the LEQ don't have anything to do with the Cold War. And you look at question 2, evaluate the relative importance of causes of conflict among Europeans and Native Americans. Okay, I could do that one. You know, if we didn't have, now if we had strong coverage here, then probably did fine there. But if we didn't, then we can go back here. This exam is full of choices. Okay, so if we look at, if we look at set 2, for example, and we go over here and we see, we go through here, these exams only really get easier, okay? And so with that, temperance, prohibition, that kind of stuff. And then we've got, a choice between, describe one United States government policy from 1783 to 1840. I think I can do that. Okay. I mean, check this out, ladies and gentlemen. Like, what are you afraid of? It's just like, when you were little and your parents check under the bed and you swear there's a monster under that bed, and your parents look under the bed. There's like, there's no monster. Shut up, go to sleep. Okay. And the thing is that, when you're thinking about this, it's like, yeah, I think I can describe one United States government policy. I mean, I can think about 15 of them off the top of my head. And so then regional divisions, we can see that. Now, also, I use the term sectionalism in class, and the exam tends to gravitate toward regional divisions. So keep that in mind if your teacher uses the term sectionalism, which is typically the more commonly used term, by historians, but regional, okay? So the thing is, this is the easiest thing I've ever seen in my life, okay? Now, my teacher didn't get to the Cold War, and it's like, well, look, neither one of these are at the Cold War, so stop panicking, okay? Now, maybe, and the thing is, there is no scenario where all of these questions are going to come from the same period. like they have intentionally, look at this, the 1960s, okay? We see here the 1960s, then we see here the late, the 1800s, okay? We see the 1800s, and then here we see the 17 and 1800s, and here 18 and early 1900s. So there's no scenario in which it just takes everything from a historical period that, that you're weak on. Evaluate the extent to which threats to the United States shaped society from 1917 to 1945, entry into World War I to the end of World War II. Oh, my teacher barely got to the Cold War. So what? Look, it's not a big deal, okay? So as far as that goes, that, it's just y'all get so scared of these things, and you see the actual exam, and it's really not that hard. And you know what? If it were that hard, if it is that hard, then, it just is what it is. I mean, it's just, some people, but note that 3/4 of the people who take this exam, based on the recalibration they did last year, almost 3/4 of people who sit for the APUSH exam pass it. Okay. Settler expansion influencing North America, 1754 to 1800. Evaluate the extent to which migration influenced the Western United States, 1820 to 1898. I will remind y'all that I've got this APUSH immigration review. Okay, so if you type in, if you Google Tom Richey APUSH immigration review notes, okay, and basically, if I want to look through here, evaluate the extent to which migration influenced the Western United States, 1820 to 1898. Watch this. All right. So we see here 1820, antebellum period. We see Anglo-American settlers in Texas. So we've got this here. Then we also have the Manifest Destiny and the Gold Rush, okay, Chinese immigrants and all of that. So we see here that, this is something that, okay, 1898. So we've got the Chinese Exclusion Act, we've got the Gold Rush, we've got Anglo settlers in Texas, and the Mexican-American War. This is so easy, okay? And then the extent to which migration influenced, oh, wow, okay, so check this out. Migration influenced American society, 1932 to 2000. Oh my goodness, this thing cuts off in 1890. Richie, why does this thing cut off in 1890? Chill, page 2, you see? And then you go through here, and there it is. Now, the LEQs may not be about migration 2 years in a row, but 1 year's LEQ is another year's SAQ, another year's multiple choice, stimulus set, and all of that. So if you just type in Tom Richey immigration and in immigration notes, APUSH, you'll see this 2-pager that I put together that I think is extremely helpful. So as far as that goes, yeah, I mean, there's page 2. So this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen, that we're going to be okay. Don't worry. Together, everyone achieves more. APUSH, May 9th. Okay, that's something that whenever you find, what, that should be like our daily affirmation, right? And really, I think that if I were taking the exam this year, I would put my affirmation before my DBQ and my LEQ, so that the reader can see that. I would just be like, together, everyone achieves more. APUSH. Oh, Kofi, sorry about that. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Do you forgive me as I forgive you? Okay, I certainly hope so. We will all get 5s, right? Y'all go ahead and keep believing that. All right, May 9th, APUSH. Okay, together, everyone achieves more. May 9th, APUSH. Okay, so as far as that goes, yeah, Gwen, basically, Owen, from what I see there, yeah, basically what they seem to have done this time is they look at the scores and they decide that, okay, these 73% are going to pass, these 20%, these 27% are going to fail. So as long as you don't score, together, everyone achieves more. May 9th. APUSH. Okay, I'm going to get this right before the night's over. Okay, I'm going to get this right. Okay, together, everyone achieves more. May 9th, APUSH. Woo! All right, so we're gonna work. Okay, take the bullet, but the thing is, ladies, yeah, somebody's like, hey, I'll tell you, I mean, if you can get one person out of four, take the bullet. The thing is, I don't know that D-Day is, I mean, it doesn't hurt to know that D-Day happened, but I don't know if I would say, I mean, that was a turning point. It's certainly a major event in World War II. I would say, as far as if you're looking for a turning point, so to speak, I don't think that there was really a point where, okay, like the Americans and the Nazis are like fighting like directly, and that the Nazis are, it's now maybe a little bit North Africa. But again, this isn't something to like, really look deep into. The Battle of Midway, I would say, if you're looking for a turning point in World War II, that the Japanese in the first part of 1942 had supremacy over the United States in the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is one of those things you can compare the United States, in World War II to the Union in the Civil War, and the Japanese to the Confederacy. The Japanese had, a lot of advantages right at the very beginning of the war because they were prepared for the war. The United States really wasn't exactly. And so the Battle of Midway, the United States had this spectacular naval victory over Japan. And after the Battle of Midway, then, the United States is pretty much just kind of grinding down Japan after that. So the Japanese, one of the reasons they bombed Pearl Harbor the way they did, they needed to try to take out the United States Navy as soon as they could, okay, as soon as they could. They couldn't really afford to have a long war, the same way that the Confederacy in the Civil War couldn't afford to have a long war. Okay. So as far as that goes, Elizabeth, I think that if you're studying anything that is relevant, okay, anything that is relevant to APUSH and isn't going too deep in the weeds, that you are doing yourself a favor. Okay. So just go ahead and kind of think about that this is something that you want to be considering here, that, what to study. We can talk about what usually appears on exams or what's most likely, but you're only going to get to take one exam. So your prob and stats teacher would like the prob and stat. I mean, you can go into that, or you can just be like, okay, we're just going to have to study. And so with that, let's go into the Gilded Age. I see there actually is some demand for going into the Gilded Age. So let's go ahead. And the thing is, what I want to note here is when you're looking at these two pagers that I've written for these different units, they include pretty much what I did is I picked the stuff that's going to be most helpful to you going into the exam, not just the multiple choice, but the DBQ, LEQ, and SAQs. So now, if you want to know a panic of 1893, that would be one worth knowing. I believe they've called the Panic of 1893 the worst economic downturn other than the Great Depression. Okay, that was a really big deal there. So when we're looking at this, when we're thinking about the Unit 6, the so-called Gilded Age, this is the period where, we're getting into the Civil War's over. Remember, before the Civil War, we have the Mexican-American War, and we get the Mexican Cession. And then from there, we are, from the Mexican Cession, from there, we then argue about whether there will be slavery there. And then finally, we have the Civil War. Once that's over, the attention of the U.S. government is already heading back west. Now, note that we do want to note that pieces of legislation like the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railway Act, these were passed in 1862 by the Republican Congress during the Civil War, okay? So basically, we see here that there are the Homestead Act is it's giving free land to people who will make farms on the Great Plains. Okay, this is the free soilers, if you think about it. The Homestead Act is literally free soil. That if you want to move to Kansas or Nebraska or the Dakotas, then you can file for a homestead, and the federal government, you move out there and you set up a farm on the land, and there you go. That the land's yours once you can show that you actually put a working farm on it and are living there. And so that's something that was encouraging migration toward the West. That's also something that falls into that kind of when we were looking at that that LEQ a little while ago. So then the Pacific Railway Act, which gave generous land subsidies. A subsidy is basically an incentive to do something on the economic sphere, an incentive offered by some government or something like that. So these policies led to the rapid settlement and economic development of the West. It came at the expense of the freedom of Native Americans who were forced onto reservations. Okay, and these reservations would typically be away from the natives' ancestral lands. And so, with that, Congress passed the Dawes Act. Now, this is different than the Dawes Plan in the 1920s, but I think the Dawes Act is something that's important in the sense that, it breaks up tribal reservations and says that, okay, here's an allotment of land to each Native American family, and the rest of this land's being opened up for white settlement. The intent of the Dawes Act was, of course, to open up Indian lands for white settlement, but also to encourage Native Americans to assimilate, okay, basically to try to get in to the mainstream American culture. Now, one thing that we'll note here is sometimes you hear about like the Indian New Deal in 1934. Basically, this is where, FDR, and, this is one of those things I don't think gets into most classrooms, but it's called sometimes the Indian New Deal, that FDR then says we're bringing back the reservation system. We are trying to encourage Native Americans to keep their cultures, to have their reservations. And so we see U.S. spending, okay, is something that, is going to, kind of move. Looks like we've got here U.S. spending. But basically, we see here that the main thing is they're going to bring back the reservation system, okay? That's under FDR. Now, the other thing that we want to understand is that farmers, now, before the Civil War, it was a good time to be a farmer generally. Most Americans, the majority of Americans were farmers during the Civil War, or before the Civil War, rather. After the Civil War, the government is turning its attention toward the development of an industrial economy. And you really get those full-scale protective tariffs that Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay were going for. They wanted these massive protective tariffs. Now, of course, you see, those of you who follow the news, you see that President Trump, wants to bring back tariffs, okay? And basically, protective tariffs, it made it to where it was more expensive. Now, it helped factory owners not have to deal with foreign competition, but at the same time, it drove up the cost of farm equipment, okay? So because you either had to buy American farm equipment that was going to be more expensive because the factories weren't efficient, or you had to buy farm equipment from foreign sources, and they'd have to pay the tariff. I was seeing something that Ford has raised the prices of 3 cars that it manufactures in Mexico. The thing is, when you have protective tariffs, it brings up prices, but it also, on the other side, it encourages companies to build their factories in the United States. So again, it's a trade-off. In economics, we call that a trade-off. And so then, now, we want to note these technological innovations. That's one of the things that is driving industrial development, is technological innovations. So the Bessemer process. Now, this is something that I think is very, very important. So this happens in the 1850s. And, who invented the steel plow? John Deere. Now, steel had been around ever since the Romans. The Romans had steel swords, and they were great, okay? The Roman gladius is a great sword. But when you think about the amount of steel it takes to build a Roman gladius or a steel plow, and the amount of steel it takes to make railroad tracks like all across the country, you need to make a large amount of steel. So this is what's called a Bessemer converter. So the Bessemer process, what it does is it allows for the mass production of steel. So when we think about Carnegie Steel, Andrew Carnegie did not invent steel. Andrew Carnegie perfected the mass production of steel. Okay, so that's what we want to understand with this, that this creates this system where you can now have mass production. So railroads were very rare during the 1830s and 1840s. They were usually local. They didn't you didn't see much of the country covered with railroads. But in the 1850s, with the Bessemer process, all of a sudden steel can be mass produced. So that is a very important invention, in my opinion. Now, skyscrapers, buildings that are 10 stories and taller. Now, a 10-story building, I don't know if we call that a skyscraper today, but by the standards of the time, if you're going to build a 3-story building, you can build that out of brick or whatever else you're going to build, right? But if you're going to build a 10-story building, you need to have steel beams, okay? That there needs to be a steel frame in order to build a skyscraper. And so it also allowed to build bridges across large rivers like the Mississippi. Thomas Edison and the light bulb. This is the time. Now, Edison also invented the phonograph, which is the first thing that's invented where you can record sounds that can be played back. It's just, we take that for granted, just being able to put on the sound recorder and just go, right? And then Alexander Graham Bell's telephone. So the idea, if we go back before the Civil War, we see Morse's telegraph, but now we've got a telephone where two people can talk in real time to each other. Okay, so with that, now one thing that's leading to economic growth is the technological innovation. The other is industrial capitalism, okay? And that's where you have John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. I would say they're the most important, but it also wouldn't hurt if you know a bit about Cornelius Vanderbilt and or J.P. Morgan, okay? If you have an account at Chase Bank, that is a division, that's the consumer division of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. So we can still, if you fill up at the Exxon station, that is, that's John D. Rockefeller. Exxon is a Standard Oil successor company. If you pull for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Pittsburgh is where Andrew Carnegie had a lot of his steel mills. And so with that, we see here, oh, okay, I think I put protective tariffs in red twice, but again, that's a pretty important thing, okay? Now, trust. A trust is when, like, multiple business entities put themselves under the control of one board, okay? Now, that's something today we can think about like a trust. If you think about Instagram, WhatsApp, and Facebook, they're all part of Meta. Meta is a parent company that basically has a common board that directs all of them, okay? So that's something now you see here. This cartoon is called The Bosses of the Senate. So when we think trust, we think the monopolies, like basically these business interests that are consolidating power. Now, on one hand, we want to note that these business interests are driving economic growth, okay? There is a massive and unparalleled economic growth here. And it's not just rich people. One thing that kind of gets lost in the details is that during the so-called Gilded Age, which Mark Twain came up with, when something's golden, it's gold all the way through. If it's gilded, it has gold on the outside, but not on the inside, okay? And so then when we're looking at the Gilded Age, Mark Twain thought, you know what? It's like a golden age for some people. But we also want to note that during the so-called Gilded Age, there's also a very rapid expansion of the urban middle class, because you've got a class of people who are going, they need to be the managers. You need educated people to run the factories and supervise and run the supplies and talk on the telephones and, count the money and all of this stuff. So with this, we want to note that, the trust became controversial, even though at the same time, they were driving economic growth. But, there was a popular outcry against trust, and that led to the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. Now, a lot of people talk about, compared to the Clayton Act, it was kind of a weak act. But it was also the act that Teddy Roosevelt used to bust up Northern Securities, and William Howard Taft used it to bust up Standard Oil. So the Sherman Antitrust Act wasn't worthless, but, it wasn't as powerful as the Progressive Era Clayton Act. And it also, it wasn't powerful, and it didn't exempt labor unions the way the Clayton Act did. So with that, let me go ahead and check the chat, see what's going on here. We'll go ahead and say hey to some people. Robin, I appreciate it. All right. Oh wow, Wig Party Free has gone triple platinum in this household. So with that, everyone I tell you what, we're getting fives and all that kind of stuff. There's a super chat, the king of APUSH. Now, remember, king of APUSH, we've got a Republican form of government in this country, but I'm being asked here. Let's see. So, let's see, Miss Sturdivant, Nico, Nick, Bree, Saul, Isabella, Genesis, Santiago. I students are inventors. I students are inventors, ladies and gentlemen. I students are inventors. Gert, yo, anything but studying. Okay, that's what we're seeing there, ladies and gentlemen. Gert, yo, anything but studying. I students are inventors. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all very much for that super chat. Oh gosh, there are a few super chats. Joy, all right, thank you, Joy, for all of your all of your support. Yeah, I gotta make sure I'm not missing some super chats. Now, sometimes I think YouTube, if it's just like a $1 or $2 super chat, will disappear, I think. But we got, thank y'all. I just made $10 just being out here talking about APUSH. That's not too bad, isn't it? So we've got that there. Let's see what we've got in the Crowdcast chat. Okay, Monarchy entered the chat. Very good, Julia. All right. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, just having a lot of fun here. Thank y'all for those of y'all that are watching, and we're going over live, laugh, love. There we go. All right, there we go, Elizabeth. So going from there, oh my goodness. So with that, let's go ahead and go back to the Gilded Age. And one of these things we'll note is kind of connected to Reconstruction, the post-Reconstruction, quote unquote, New South. Okay. Now, one thing about the New South that's very interesting is it's the only thing in the course and exam description that appears in air quotes. Okay. The New South appears in air quotes. All right. So after the Civil War, slavery no longer existed in the South. There was more openness to industry. Okay. I need to put a comma after South. I hope y'all forgive me as I forgive y'all. In Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama. Now, one thing, if we go to Google Maps and we say Birmingham, Alabama, which it emerges as an industrial city. If any of y'all are from Alabama, the annual game between Auburn and Alabama is called the Iron Bowl because it used to be in Birmingham, which was the industrial capital of the South. Now check this out. Birmingham, what do y'all see there? Birmingham, Alabama. Right outside of Birmingham, Alabama, we've got Bessemer, Alabama, the Bessemer process. So Birmingham was an iron and steel making city in the South. So, the Iron Bowl, Auburn and Bama, they go back and forth now, but they used to play every year in Birmingham, and they called it the Iron Bowl. So Birmingham is something, of course, Birmingham also shows up in the civil rights movement as well, with the civil disobedience and the protest out there and Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. So same city. But Birmingham, we hear a lot about Pittsburgh, but Birmingham became like the South's kind of rival city to Pittsburgh. And so the thing is, though, when we think about the idea of a New South, it's always in air quotes, because while you have Birmingham, while of course slavery is no longer there, we still see that most people in the South are still farming. And the majority of those formerly enslaved, and a large part of the white population as well, worked as sharecroppers. And basically, every year they owed a share of the crop to the owner of the land. And they also, when they paid their share of the crop, they also had to pay off their debts at the company store and all this stuff. It just wasn't a good time to be a farmer. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Now, we also want to note that Booker T. Washington had been born into slavery. His autobiography, if you want some summer reading, look at Booker T. Washington's book, Up from Slavery, one of the best books that I've ever read. And so this is where we see here the Tuskegee Institute. Now, Booker T. Washington started the Tuskegee Institute, and he said that he wanted to create a situation where Black people in the South are, learning, not only getting an education academically, but also learning a skilled trade. And when I talk about a skilled trade, that means something that you have to learn how to do. Somebody can't just teach you over a little bit of time, okay? And also the Tuskegee Institute, that's where we get the Tuskegee Airmen, otherwise known as the Red Tails, with the fighter pilots in World War II. So with that, Booker T. Washington is a major figure there. And remember that Booker T. Washington, said that, while people like W.B. Du Bois said that the most important thing facing the Black community in the United States was that they were unable to vote, Booker T. Washington said that the ballot that matters most is the green ballot. Okay. He gave his speech, which is called the Atlanta Compromise speech. And what he was hoping for is that white Southerners would support, Black education and Black empowerment if the Black community in the South didn't agitate for political rights and voting rights. And I don't think that Booker T. Washington ended up, seeing his realization happen there. Instead, you see it turn into the lynching crisis, which Ida B. Wells, a muckraker, was someone who, was exposing that lynching crisis. So as far as that goes, we see labor in the Gilded Age, okay? That we see labor unions using strikes. Now, the two strikes that I've highlighted, and there are others, there's the Great Railroad Strike and the Haymarket Affair, okay? But I typically will note the Homestead Strike and the Pullman Strike. Those are two to look up that I think would be a good idea. I think it's too much to try to get all of the major strikes, and you don't need to. There aren't specific strikes that you have to know for APUSH. It would just be good if there's a certain strike that you're able to speak intelligently about. Remember that this stuff here is not nearly as much about the how many things you can mention, but how many things can you speak intelligently about? Okay, that's really what is important here. How many things can you speak, about? Haven't you seen his text with connections going crazy? Charles, are we getting a little bit of lag here and there? Sometimes that happens. Thank you so much, lad, for the for the kind words there. And excuse me. Now, Owen, for context, it's not so much about memorizing in advance, like what the context is. Now, of course, the other thing is, if you're wanting historical context, like for the Gilded Age, maybe you could go into the Market Revolution, maybe you go into the Civil War. Now, if the essay is about the Civil War, reach back to the 1850s. If the essay is about Reconstruction, reach back to the Civil War. Okay, just reach back to the thing before it. So the Progressive Era. If the essay is about the Progressive Era, reach back to the Gilded Age, okay? Just reach back to something right before it. That's something that I think is usually a good strategy when we think about that. No, Turkey, what happens here? Turkey Brown, if that's his real name. But the SAQs, basically there are 4 SAQs. You have to do 3 of them. You have to do SAQ1 and SAQ2. These both have a stimulus in front of them, okay? First one is secondary sources. You've got 2 historians. The second one is, going to be a primary source that could be visual or print. Then you get to choose 3 or 4, which neither one of those has a stimulus. 3 is from the first half of the course. 4 is from the second half of the course. So again, if you're in a situation where you are as far as that, but as far as that goes, yeah, the context does need to be, okay, yeah, I think Wendy, we got a teacher talking there. Thank you, Wendy, but yeah, it needs to be connected to the prompt. It needs to be relevant, okay? So with that, if you're thinking about, it's just, you can't just reach back and think of nothing. So when it comes down to it, if it's about the Civil War, you can't just reach back and be like, hey, Second Great Awakening or something like that. That's something to kind of think about. I think specific names, one thing, Alexandra, Fancy. All right, Alexandra, can we call you Fancy? So one of the things that's very important when we're looking at the specific names, is it okay? So you're not sure the specific names. I always say when people ask me, how specific do I need to be? How specific can you be? Okay. So for example, yeah, if you have the date, great. If you don't have the date, it's not a big deal. So, let's think about the Intolerable Acts, 1774. Now, Boston Port Act, the name of the legislation, right? It closed the Boston Port. Now, you're like, gosh, I forget, what was that act that closed the Boston Port? Don't worry about it. Closed the Boston Port. Intolerable Acts, 1774. Okay. So as far as that goes, yeah, y'all, the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and shut that part down. This is not the time to learn how to write a DBQ. Okay. Like, this is one of those things that when you start talking about counter arguments, you're getting in a complex understanding, which is a point that, like, I think about 8% of students who take the exam get. You don't need it to make a 5. The best way to get, when we start talking about HIP and complex understanding, these are things that you really should be prepared for this in advance. This is not the time to be getting into how do I earn points that the majority of people don't earn. Okay, that's really one of the worst ways that you can spend the night before the exam. I would be focusing on how do you, and it's not necessarily, going against your thesis. Your thesis should be you should be thinking in terms of, how can I broaden my thesis so that, it can be nuanced and stuff. But again, we don't need to worry about that if we haven't done it already. Okay. So with that, that's what we want to kind of think about here, that, these are some things that, if you've gotten those points before, great. But if you haven't, focus on the points that the majority of people earn. So with that, yeah, Albert IO, and remember, I've got that multiple choice exam. Also, if you go to crowdcast.io/Tom Richey, I did a multiple choice strategy session last night. That was free, and you can actually go into that session and you can look at that. So if you want to think about MCQs, and remember, I've got that practice exam on Albert IO. Okay, so that's something that we want to understand is out there. Okay, so as far as that goes, DBQ. Now, one thing, actually, there have been DBQs in the 20th century in the past 10 years, but I would say that it's just don't worry about that so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and kind of think about. Let's continue going over the Gilded Age and what's left of that. Now, I also told you I've got that immigration review handout, right? So as far as that goes, you just put in Tom Richey, APUSH, immigration review. And so we see here the Chinese Exclusion Act, okay? The Chinese Exclusion Act, and, the Chinese were the first class of people to be excluded from the United States by law. Before the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is something that was passed in 1882. Now, again, do I need to know 1882? If I remember it, great. But what if I say Chinese Exclusion Act that passed in 1884? That would be called a minor error, and nobody's going to count that against you. But the main thing, the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. You don't have to know the exact date that something happened in order to use it. Now, the Panic of 1893, the Compromise of 1850, you might want to know the dates on those, the Proclamation Line of 1763, might want to know the dates there. Now, the new immigrants. Now, again, in that immigration handout that I've shared with y'all, that you can just Google Tom Richey APUSH immigration review. That this is something that you can go in here and you can look at what's going on with immigration here, okay? And then I go into the new immigrants in the 1800s, which I tell you what, they're gearing up. There's going to be the Greek Fest in Greenville, South Carolina, which is the nearest major city to me. That's going to be, I think, next weekend, the Greek Festival, And so when we think here, my ancestors have been here for hundreds of years. I'm descended from quote unquote old immigrants. My ancestry DNA is the most basic thing you've ever seen. Mostly British Isles, little France, little Germany, little Scandinavia or Dutch. And that's about it. That's about it. All of my DNA is like Northern and Western Europe. And that is typical of a lot of people who've been here for, their family's been here for a long time. But the new immigrants, Italy, Poland, Greece, Russia, Southern and Eastern Europe. Okay, so Southern and Eastern Europe, we see a lot of immigrants coming from these places. Now, we saw there's a new Pope, and the Pope is an American. I tell you what, how about that? Like, yay, America. Like, this is one of those things. I tell you what, the AMSCO will have to put that in there, right? We got Pope Leo the 14th, the first American Pope who's ever been elected, which it's very interesting thinking about if you look at like Thomas Nast anti-Catholic cartoons, and also the rise of the second Ku Klux Klan in the second Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. This idea that was very present in American Protestant thought that Catholicism was somehow un-American. There are all of these, cartoons here. Yeah, what we see here, Thomas Nast from Harper's Weekly is basically showing like these American children, and there are the alligators and crocodiles. The Catholic Church is coming to eat the children. I can't even make this up, can I? So you see now, so it's really interesting. I think that we are actually broadcasting on a historic day where we now have an American Pope, and the Catholic Church, for so much of American history, Catholics were so mistreated. And so we go there that, it's just the Catholics are trying to take over the country. And we see here that basically there's Rome, that American Catholic bishops aren't really loyal to the country. They're really just loyal to Rome and not really to Uncle Sam. So we see a lot of discrimination against these new immigrants. And again, I think that, today, now I never know what history will say about something, right? But as far as that goes, I think that it is a very, important kind of day when we think about the idea of an American Pope. If you would have told people that, that's, Caitlin might just thug it out. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean just kind of show up and do your thing there? So going from that, we look at the Gilded Age. We do want to think about, there is this massive influx of people that aren't coming from Northern and Western Europe, and they don't speak languages that are similar to English. I've researched. I found out it's not as easy for us to learn German because of their grammar structure, but it's very easy for a German or a Scandinavian to learn English. But when you look at people coming from, Greece, Poland, Russia, Italy, and now Jane Addams, the test makers love Jane Addams. Any teachers in the chat, they can tell you the test makers love Jane Addams. She founded Hull House. And basically, this was a settlement house in Chicago. And recent immigrants could take language classes, learn job skills, and develop an appreciation for American culture and the arts. And I tell you what, like if I were living during the Progressive era, I'd tell Jane Addams, look, I wrote a book about the Constitution. I'd see if the whole house wanted to buy some, and they could pass it out to the recent immigrants, because part of what they were doing at Hull House is they're trying to help these immigrants adjust and assimilate into American society. And one of those things was, learning about the American system of government. And so that's one of those things that Jane Addams is someone that, is very important in that sense. And so with that, I don't think I mentioned Jane Addams in my book, but I think she would have liked my book because, it's something that is a simple introduction to the United States Constitution, which is what Jane Addams is trying to provide people with. So with this, now also remember, the growth of big business. A lot of times we get like the bad side of that, but we want to remember also that there was a ton of economic growth during the Gilded Age, and a lot of people were a lot better off than they were before that. Now, Andrew Carnegie wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth, okay, where he talked about philanthropy. Philanthropy means in Greek, love of man. And think y'all, let's see, Run, Ring for Fun, and Leanne Golden. Thank y'all so much for the recent follows on Instagram. All right. So going with that, let's see, that we've got on one side the gospel of wealth. Now, note, philanthropy is not charity. Philanthropy is kind of like charity, but it's more of an investment in society. Philanthropy is finding someone who's a talented artist, excuse me, and giving them money so that they could buying their art from them. You know, J.P. Morgan bought a lot of art, and a lot of artists were able to do what they did because of people like J.P. Morgan. You know, John D. Rockefeller founded the University of Chicago and Spelman College. You know, these places of higher education. You know, charity is giving someone who is, you know, like a poor vagrant, giving them some money so that they can do whatever they're going to do with it. Whereas philanthropy is finding someone, you know, who is, you know, who's very smart and saying, hey, I'm going to help you go to college. I'm going to pay your educational expenses because it's good for society. John D. Rockefeller. I always tell people that John D. Rockefeller, if you've never had yellow fever, which none of you have, and the reason you haven't had it is because of John D. Rockefeller. So the thing is, I'm a big fan of John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller made the oil better and he made the oil cheaper. You know, that's something that a lot of times doesn't get into this course, that people aren't noting that John D. Rockefeller actually did raise the quality of oil. Like, you knew that your oil wasn't going to blow up, and it made the oil cheaper. But again, you know, people oftentimes resent people's success. And, you know, and also Jacob Riis, you know, whereas Andrew Carnegie says, I'm not really about helping the poor. I want to build, like, you know, I want to patronize universities and I want to build Carnegie Hall. I want to, you know, I think what, like 5,000 Carnegie libraries. Andrew Carnegie imagined a United States, maybe even a world, where the amount of money that you had didn't dictate whether you could read books. Okay. He founded thousands of libraries so that people, no matter what their socioeconomic status, could just go and they could get a library card and they can check out books from the library. So, you know, a lot of things here, the gospel of wealth is basically like, look, I'm Andrew Carnegie. I know how to allocate resources business wise, and I want to do the same thing for society. Now, Jacob Riis, you know, was kind of a proto muckraker. I would call him kind of the godfather of muckraking, where, you know, he said, look, he wrote this book, How the Other Half Lives. And we see here that when we look at Riis and tenements. Okay, if we look at the tenements, gosh, I mean, the tenements, remember, those are those low rent apartments and stuff like that. You know, he takes pictures of these immigrants here that are just like sleeping in this, you know, this place where it's just like, I think like 5 cents a space or something. Let's see, I'm not getting the whole thing coming up here, but it's just like, it's just not a good way to live. And, you know, Riis goes into parts of New York City where, you know, you have here, I guess, some of those sweatshops where a lot of these immigrants would, you know, work. Okay, that's a saloon. Okay, it looks like. But again, you see how they're all just sleeping in these spaces. They're hanging the clothes. You know, you know, some of, you know, who go into the saloons, and he'll note the relationship between, you know, between economic poverty and moral poverty. And it looks like he's having to use his flash because this is a windowless room. I mean, it's just people are, you know, again, it's, you know, a lot of economic growth, a lot of rich people, a lot of middle class people, a lot more than there were. And, but at the same time, you know, not a great time to be poor. Like, you know, if somebody told me I got a time machine, you got to go back somewhere and be poor. I'm like, are you sure? I got to go, you know, and I don't know what time I'd want to go to and be poor, but I know what time I'd want to go to and not be poor. Now, the other thing is there was a great deal of corruption in government. A couple of things you could note are the credit mobilier scandal, which was basically where members of Congress, they knew that this railroad construction company was fake, and they continued to finance it anyway because they were getting stock in the company. So we saw that, you know, Congress, members of Congress who are supposed to represent the people are, you know, are basically, you know, involved in the corruption. That's when you think about the bosses of the Senate, this perception, and to some extent backed up by reality with things like the credit mobilier scandal. Now, political machines, what political machines are is they were organizations, primarily, you know, urban Democratic Party organizations that basically, you know, they would give you, if you were a recent immigrant, they'd give you a job, they'd make sure you had like everything that you needed. And then when it came time to vote, you needed to vote for the machine candidate. Now, this was before the secret ballot, which was something advocated for by the populists. So we want to note that Southern and Western farmers, they weren't doing very well. Okay, because the thing is, the high protective tariffs. These were things that were not helping farmers. They were designed to help industry, and they're not helping farmers at all. And so with this, the Populist Party, they formed in the 1890s. Now, again, you don't have to know the exact, like really for most things, you can remember decades, okay? Don't try to remember that last number, except for the Panic of 1893, right? They wanted a lower tariff because that would make their farm equipment, cheaper, and they could trade. They could ship some of their produce out. And then the unlimited coinage of silver. Another thing that they noted was there was a currency shortage. There's a certain amount of currency that needs to circulate so that farmers can pay their mortgage and their bills and all of that. And the government was pursuing what you call sound money policies, the gold standard. And the gold standard is something that was, the gold standard is something that is, like we just keep a certain amount of currency, like only, we're making gold coins and we're limiting the amount of silver that can be coined so that keeps the U.S. money from inflating. But the thing is, the populists, they said, look, I mean, this is something that, we owe our mortgages and all of that. It wasn't helping them at all. And remember, the Panic of 1893, that's something that, you might want to know that one. Now, 1817 or 1819, 1837, there are all these panics. I would say aside from the Panic of 1893, you really don't need to know a lot of them or any of them. Now, also the Panic of 1893 is associated with the Pullman strike. Because with the Panic of 1893, Pullman basically he cuts wages, but he doesn't make proportional cuts in rent. And that's where Eugene V. Debs, kind of steps onto the scene there. Okay, Eugene V. Debs steps onto the scene. So that's something that we see there. Let's see. Let's see, I don't know where I would put that. All right, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we got through the Gilded Age. That was a pretty demanded topic, right? That was a pretty demanded topic. And with that, that I think here, yeah, we got to get some good sleep tonight. I kind of agree with you, Owen. I agree with you on the good sleep, and I've had a good time, and I really appreciate everybody that's been over here. Together, we achieve more. May 9th, APUSH. I thought it was Together Everyone Achieves More, May 9th, APUSH. Which one was that? Let's make sure we're saying it right when we say it, because I was criticized earlier for getting it wrong, right? So let's make sure here that, thinking of Dale Carnegie, I don't even know who that is. Is he on the exam? Do I need to learn that one? All right, Together Everyone Achieves More, May 9th, APUSH, okay? And so with that, let's go ahead and let's see if we've got some shout outs there. Easy 100. Okay. Yeah, I remember seeing that on the TikTok. Was that somebody on the TikTok shared that with me? Okay. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're about time to call it a night. I'll be glad to hear some last minute shout outs. Let's see. We got Lad, a shout out for Lad. We've got somebody is manifesting fives. APUSH on 3. 1, 2, 3. APUSH. We're getting fives, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out AP Bio Penguins. FDR's. Okay, yeah, the thing is, I think I'm kind of done for the night. Now, I might be on the TikToks. I'm going to let y'all know. I might, after 8 something, rest my voice. Y'all can tell my voice kind of needs a rest. May 9th. Wow. Okay, shout out to Don Ho. Shout out to Mr. Anderson. Makes me think about the Matrix. Mr. Anderson. Okay, I wonder if that's probably the first time he's gotten that. Remember the Maine. Remember Don Ho. Shout out Mr. Hamilton. Shout out Mr. Richard or Mr. Richard if he's from my native state of Louisiana. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, shout out to Mr. Krastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We've had a small crowd tonight, but a really good crowd. Mr. Bush. So we've got that. And let's see, Mr. Gilbertson, third period APUSH. Yeah, Hari, good to see you here, man. I tell you what, yeah, Hari, great to see you here tonight. Glad you said hey. I tell you, Hari, that's one I'd bet on Hari making a five. That was great working with him this year. Lin Manuel Miranda. I don't think I'm not a big Hamilton musical person, but if y'all want that shout out, y'all gonna do that. Mr. Featherman and Miss J, very good. Mrs. Hester, thank y'all so much, and Miss Coolenschmidt. All right, thank you so much. Shout out Miss Hester for getting you to Unit 9. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, shout out to Tori Siegel. If your teacher, wherever your teacher got. All right. So as far as that goes, remember the Alamo, ladies and gentlemen. Remember the Alamo. Gosh, Eliza Hamilton, poor woman, huh? So to Miss Miss Becerra, and thank you, Ketke. Thank you for everything that you're doing here. Give me five or give me death. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, give me five or give me death. Patrick Henry, shout out to Jimmy Carter, RIP, huh? All right, ladies and gentlemen, the college board. Let's see, celebrate the new pope. Everybody's got fives, right? We've got an American pope. So let's go ahead and get ready to say goodnight. Now, again, I might be on the TikToks later on, ladies and gentlemen. What's the worst that I could say? Things are better if I stay. So long and good night. So long and good night. If Don Ho takes my exam for me, then I'd make it at least a 3. So long and good night. So long and good night. All right, ladies and gentlemen, R.I.P. Don Ho. I don't know where that guy went, but we won't forget him, will. That was quite a chat last night. That was quite a chat. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much, and best of luck to everybody tomorrow. And we'll see if I show up on the TikToks later on. And yes, okay, remember, guys, 3 is greater than 2. Gaslight yourself. Become narcissistic, gain God complex. I have all of these, and they gave me the confidence of 3 random Instagram users. That is a direct quote from Don Ho. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I might have to put that somewhere. Let me see here. But yeah, that's something that was an incredible quote, was it not? But again, remember, in the spirit of Don Ho, make sure y'all got confidence in yourself, right? Make sure you've got confidence in yourself, and that is a very, very important thing for y'all to have. And so let's see, the background cut there, it's white text. Okay, so I just need to note here, I just need to send that to myself so I don't forget that ever, right? So ladies and gentlemen, remember Don Ho, and just do all those things, and you're going to do great. Don't talk about failing or anything like that. It's just not something we need to be thinking about, right? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, manifesting your destiny, which is to have a 5. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see. So Amy, yep, I love Amy. FR. All right. So y'all have a great time. And remember, be sure to get some sleep, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, it is always a pleasure.